What criteria did I find for ambidextrous leaders? A short resume. We said in an earlier episode that an ambidextrous executive is someone who promotes both exploration and exploitation with leadership and management skills, transactional and transformational, and opening and closing leadership styles. In making these connections, we can use well-known concepts and the criteria contained within them for executives. These well-known concepts would be the role of leader or manager and transactional and transformational leadership. Put together, these concepts provide a broader context. This context might be seen as a wood, as it were. And next, I wanted to look at the trees. With that in mind, I reviewed a lot of papers and books and found criteria like integrity, openness, optimism, decisiveness, and much more. The special things about this review are: firstly, I included a broad range of criteria. A company can compare these with criteria they use and perhaps widen their scope. Secondly, these criteria, such as openness, are specific and can be used in the assessment process. Thirdly, I don't dismiss any criterion as irrelevant because it could become important at some future point. Not all criteria are going to be important all the time, but the ambidextrous executive must be able to call on the required skills when they are needed. For example, in a given situation, creativity is called for, in another, courage, and so on, which demonstrates the value of taking all identified criteria as essential for the position of an ambidextrous top executive at all times, providing full confidence in that person's ability to respond flexibly to changing demands. So, the relevance of the criteria in the ambidextrous leadership concept can vary over time. Fourthly, it becomes clear that you are looking for a generalist rather than a specialist. Fifth point, we can divide the criteria into two categories. For category 1, I use the heading one-dimensional criteria, which includes criteria such as intelligence, being a team player, and creativity. In this category, the criteria are only judged on the extent to which they are met or not. There is no differentiation between exploration and exploitation, because it wouldn't make any sense to say that a person is intelligent in exploitation but not in exploration. The situation is different with the criteria in category 2, which I call multidimensional criteria. Qualities such as courage and ambition fall into this category. Here I looked at the extent of courage in different roles or approaches, because being courageous as a leader is different to being courageous as a manager. These criteria should also be differentiated in relation to first and second order change. Lower executives are not responsible for organizational change that is dramatic and transformative, but rather for incremental, predictable change, which can be defined as first order change. Second order change involves things like investment decisions affecting the whole organization, involving risks the CEO or the top management team are responsible for. Lower executives are required to be courageous regarding first-order changes, as when negotiating the implementation of first-order change, addressing any resistance from employees, and so on. And top executives are required to be courageous regarding second-order changes. Lower executives and top executives therefore need to be courageous within the bounds of their role. So, we can say that the roles of lower executives and CEO involve different orders of the criterion courage, meaning that in the second category we have the same criteria but different usage. Okay, so those are the relevant points. So we come to the question of how organizations can use these criteria. How organizations can use these criteria? First of all, when selecting or appraising a top exec, it's important to ensure that the appraisal criteria are aligned with the content of the specific area or role. Otherwise, the criteria could be too abstract for the assessors. Assessors should know how to apply the criteria in concrete terms. It's important to differentiate, say, between exploration and exploitation, for example, but only where this makes sense. It wouldn't make sense to say the criterion of intelligence doesn't matter in a given role, for example. On the one hand, the criteria found in my paper can be checked in the company to see whether they should be included in the evaluation process. And on the other, how they might be used in application, as just mentioned. These criteria can be used in recruiting, succession planning, personal development, or possibly in the bonus system.